Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. It is so nice to be back with you, and I certainly appreciate your patience with me as we've been kind of dealing with a little bit of a family situation over the course of the last couple of days, or at least a couple of days this week, But happy to be back here live again today. I will remind you, this is our last live show of the week. Tomorrow, we're going to have a great show. It will be pre-recorded, and then next week, we're going to be pre-recorded there as well. I am taking a vacation, looking forward to being on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. I do mean that sincerely. I appreciate your willingness to allow me to kind of step away here for a little bit, and obviously, we got great shows planned for you coming up the next few days, and then looking forward to being back live again the following Monday as we roll towards spring practice with a lot of very interesting things going on around this Georgia program here right now. So that's all to come. Today, though, fun day to be talking to you. A little bit more of the aftermath of the Mike Bobo stuff. You know, we were obviously live late on Tuesday's show when the news first broke. We had some reaction to that then. We even put that on the podcast feed. But kind of a little bit more breakdown on this, and maybe a chance to sort of speak to the warring factions that exist among Georgia fans here right now. I want to do that off the top, and then Terrence Edwards will share his thoughts on all of this today as well. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me just briefly say before we get rolling today how much I appreciate all of your kind words to me over the course of the last couple of days. And I feel like I'm really behind in terms of responding to tweets. You know, I got a great collection of birthday tweets to begin the week, and then the thing happened with my grandmother, and I got a lot of nice condolences on that. And I really feel like I haven't been able to respond to anybody, and I apologize for that. But I wanted to kind of collectively say right now just how much I appreciate your kind words. Yesterday was my grandmother's funeral, and I tell you, I was blown away by this. You know, I kind of grew up way out in the country, at least what I think of as way out in the country, and so that's where my grandmother's funeral kind of was yesterday, and Jeff Sintel was there, BJ Swinney, our boss leader here at DawgNation, he was there, and I just couldn't believe they drove from, obviously, here in the Atlanta area where we all are, way out to to the country where I grew up, but man, it was a really amazing gesture. I was very appreciative of that, and really even now, whether it be on Twitter or in our comment section, so many of you sharing so many nice words with me. I just really appreciate that. I am truly grateful for that. So I wanted to start the show by saying that today. I thought we honored her life yesterday really well, and I was really proud to kind of just sort of see the stories being told of what my grandmother meant to me and so many other people, including the others there in my family. So with that said, we'll kind of shift gears and sort of get to the topic at hand here for today. And if you don't mind, I want to start by what might come across as just a little bit maybe immodest, at the risk of sounding a little immodest. Let me tell you what I think the best thing about me is. Here's what I believe the best thing about me is. I feel like I'm really good at understanding other people's point of view. I feel like I'm good at that because, listen, I'm an opinionated guy, and, you know, I like to sit here and shout into the microphone, and, you know, I mean, you know, so you sort of fall in love with your own opinion. And obviously among Georgia fans, we are very passionate about various topics, you know, things that kind of pop up with the team. Our love for Georgia football makes us very passionate about whatever topic might, you know, come up. And so that creates these sometimes intense debates. And sometimes it's kind of annoying because it's like you're sort of just, you know, it can almost become a little too much. But on the other side of it, the intensity of the debate is sort of based in the intensity of feeling we have about the subject matter, which is the people that mostly watch or listen to the show, or certainly me, you know, kind of hosting this show. We just really love Georgia football. So this kind of gets back to the thing that I said before, which is I sort of feel like I'm good at understanding other people's point of view because in a Georgia football argument, I clearly know what I think, and I clearly know what I believe is right. Sometimes other people think something different. And I would say that even though I don't share their belief, I don't share their opinion, I at least sort of understand where they're coming from. And I would say this is also true in the topic at hand right now, which is the fact, as you know, Todd Monken has moved on to the NFL. He's been hired by the Baltimore Ravens, and immediately Kirby Smart has stepped in to announce his replacement, Mike Bobo, former Georgia offensive coordinator, close friend of Smart, working this last year as an analyst at Georgia, now back and now in place as the Georgia offensive coordinator once again. Now, I don't mind telling you, I think this is a good hire. Given the other potential names that may have been in consideration here, I haven't seen any person that I thought realistically might want the job that I think is a better fit for Georgia than what Mike Bobo might be. That's just my opinion. Other people have a completely different opinion. Now, I don't believe that every argument against Bobo is necessarily rational. I don't mind telling you that either. But in terms of the overall kind of prevailing theme of the, what I'll call, just for the sake of conversation, the anti-Bobo crowd, I at least sort of get to where you're coming from at least a little bit. And I'll say it this way. When Todd Monken was hired at Georgia to begin the 2020 season, I really don't know that many people who said, this is definitely going to be a great hire. Because Monken, like anybody else who's been coaching for a long time, you kind of have a little bit of a checkered resume. It's like, oh, well, this year in Tampa in 2018, that looks really good, but this situation in Cleveland after that sort of seems a little bit weird. Head coach at Southern Miss, was that a good thing or not? Time at Oklahoma State, that really seems to be good. It's like you have this sort of like spotty resume. You're trying to figure out exactly what that means. So I don't know that anybody necessarily knew that Todd Monken would be a great hire for Georgia, but I would say, as well as I can remember back during that time, it was mostly celebrated as a good hire for one reason, is it represented the introduction of an outside voice into the Georgia program. And at the time, kind of coming off what, had been going on at Georgia, I think there was some belief that, hey, maybe some sort of fresh offensive ideas from outside the current sphere of influence, maybe that might be a good thing. And Todd Monken, by appearances, definitely represented that. So even though people didn't necessarily know for sure if Monken would be a good hire, I would say it was mostly treated as a positive development for Georgia because it represented to some Kirby Smart's willingness to evolve a little bit based on what he had been. So that was the story then. We know how well the Todd Monken era worked at Georgia. It was a smashing success, a key contributor in the last two national championships here for UGA. Now he's gone. He's moving on to the NFL. That's the league he would just rather be in. It's just obvious that Monken sees himself as an NFL guy. We'll hear kind of more on why that might be later on. But Monken just sort of sees himself as an NFL guy. He has moved on. Now his replacement, to a lot of people, feels like the exact opposite of what Monken felt like when he came here. This feels like you're hiring a coach from within the club. Mike Bobo is a good friend of Kirby Smart. He's sort of old Georgia. He's been here for quite some time. And for as much as Monken was sort of celebrated as fresh new ideas, concepts from some foreign land now brought to Georgia, Mike Bobo does not feel like any of that at all. And for some people, that brings up sort of a degree of, well, this doesn't feel as good for me as the last hire felt, and I sort of get where you're coming from. That I don't agree with you, but I feel like I do a pretty good job of sort of understanding why you feel the way that you do. So here is what I want to try to do. Now, I'm probably biting off more than I can chew here, but here is what I want to try to do. I want to try to sort of act as peacemaker between the pro-Bobo folks, the folks who think Kirby Smart ought to get to hire the guy that he wants to, and the kind of anti-Bobo folks, the folks who say, I'm not quite so sure this was great the first time around. I'm not really quite so sure I want to see the second iteration of Mike Bobo as Georgia offensive coordinator. I want to try to bring both these factions together here. I'll probably fail at this, but I'm going to try my best here right now. And my way of doing this is to establish some common ground on what we can all agree upon. In other words, obviously, at a place like Georgia, you have to succeed. That it's not enough for Kirby Smart just to get to hire one of his friends just because he's won the last 2 years. Because at a place like Georgia in the SEC, in the current sort of cutthroat landscape of college football, obviously you got to keep winning. It's been nice to win, but you got to keep winning. And Kirby Smart's wired in such a way that he wants to keep winning. Even if he didn't want to, you'd still have to, but Kirby Smart wants to. So it's not enough to say, hey, Georgia's won the last two national championships. Now you can kick back and you bring in all your friends and you just sort of have a good time. That's not acceptable to anybody, not Smart himself either. So you've got to succeed. You've got to, the obligation to succeed still exists with Mike Bobo. So the question kind of comes down to, well, how do we define success for Mike Bobo? And that's the common ground I want to find here that sort of brings the Bobo skeptic in line with kind of the Bobo apologist, I guess if you want to call him that. Maybe people would say I'm a Bobo apologist. But let's sort of see if we can find some common ground on defining what success would be as a way of kind of bringing both these sides together. Now, let me tell you what I don't think is fair. I don't think it's fair to say, well, Mike Bobo will be judged as a success if Georgia wins a third straight national championship. Let me tell you why I don't think that's fair. Y'all, when was the last time anybody won 3 straight national championships? Whatever, we might all disagree about what the modern era of college football is, where that line gets drawn of this is the beginning of the modern era. But we can all say this, that wherever we define modern era of college football, the last three-peat took place prior to the modern era of college football. So it is not fair to hang on Mike Bobo to say, hey, your success depends on whether or not Georgia wins another national championship because no one has won 3 straight national championships. And listen, Georgia's the favorite. I believe they have a very good chance of going for 3 in 23 and all that, whatever. But the odds are still greater they won't win it next year than they will, and it's important to keep that in mind. You can't judge Bobo alone on whether Georgia wins a national championship. It's also unfair, I would say, to judge Bobo on having a bad game at some point in time, because even Todd Monken occasionally had poor offensive performances, but that didn't stop him in most of our minds from being an outstanding offensive coordinator. Take the beginning of the season against Clemson in 2021. Georgia won a game that day in which the Dogs did not score an offensive touchdown. That is true. That's not good enough offensively, but it's also kind of the outlier in what overall was an outstanding tenure for Monken at Georgia, where they essentially averaged pretty close to 40 points in each of the last 2 years. They actually exceeded 40 points this past season. So the occasional outlier game didn't change the way that folks felt about Todd Monken, nor do I think it should change the way that folks feel about Mike Bobo. I just think that's kind of the fair way to establish that debate. So let's get into then what ought to matter. Let's get into then what ought to be the true measuring stick for Georgia, how you will determine if Mike Bobo is successful as an offensive coordinator, if he is successful in taking the baton from Todd Monken from where he had this offense this past season. As a way of doing that, I want to go back in time just briefly. Kirby Smart last spring was being interviewed, I believe this is on WJOX, sports radio station in Birmingham. It was prior to that sort of celebrity golf tournament that Smart does each and every year. And Kirby Smart was asked about his offensive, outlook for this, what was at that time the upcoming year in 2022. And Smart kind of defended his offense a little bit in this question, because I do think that a lot of folks in 2021 didn't realize how good this offense actually really was. But he also used the word that I think defined Georgia offensively under Todd Monken, and something that we can all agree, whether you be Bobo skeptic, Bobo apologist, that we can all agree ought to define Bobo in his tenure as offensive coordinator. This is Smart from last summer.
Well, we want to be explosive, and we were last year. People have us everybody talks about the defense. They got overshadowed that we were top 10 in explosive passes. A lot better than a lot of teams in the country at throwing the ball down the field. We did that with very effective because we were able to run the ball. So we have to continue to do that. We've got some tight ends we got to utilize. We've got 3 or 4 wideouts that are really good players, and we think we've got some really good young backs that are going to help us.
So some of the stuff that Kirby says there at the end of that clip I want to come back to maybe a little bit later on. But the word that Smart used at the beginning of that clip is, we want to be explosive. And he says in 2021 we were. Well, we know that in 2022 that's what Georgia was there as well. And I believe when you look at that one word, explosive, the idea of explosive plays, this to me is the fair way to judge Mike Bobo. Now, in addition to that, he also needs to score about 40 points per game, because that's what Todd Monken has done. But in terms of the building blocks of how you get to that sort of, around 38, 39, 40 point per game offense, the building block, for how you get there, I believe, is via explosive plays. Because if you really want to define what made Todd Monken successful at Georgia, it was the way in which more and more explosive plays got produced while he was here. This is the thing that sort of made Monken. And this is the thing that I believe, whether Georgia fans kind of articulate it this way or not, this is sort of the thing that made Georgia fans kind of fall in love with Todd Monken, because of how many more of these kinds of explosive plays they were seeing while he was here. Can I give you a couple of numbers to back this up here for a moment? That if you look at the last year before Todd Monken came to Georgia, 2019, this was a year in which, I don't mind telling you, the offense didn't work. Georgia was 70th in the country when it comes to offensive plays of 20 or more yards, which for the sake of this conversation, that's what we're going to define as an explosive play. You can define them different ways, but for the sake of this conversation right now, we're going to define explosive plays as an offensive play of 20 or more yards. And in 2019, Georgia was 70th in the country with only 58 plays of 20 or more yards. In Todd Monken's first year, now keep this in mind, what makes this even more amazing than it seems is that in 2020, Todd Monken's first year, Georgia also played a tougher schedule that year because there were no cupcake out-of-conference games to pad your stats against, and Georgia's bowl game was against Cincinnati. So you had the all-SEC schedule because of the pandemic, bowl game against a top 10 ranked Cincinnati team, very good defensively. Yet in Monken's first year, Georgia went from having been 70th in the country in plays of 20 or more yards in 2019 to 30th in the country in plays of 20 or more yards in 2020 with 53. Now, keep in mind, they played far fewer games in 2020 than they did in 2019, but Monken almost produced the same number of plays of 20 or more yards, even though Georgia was playing far fewer games. That's amazing to me. Now, in 2021, it got even better, and this is part of the reason why Georgia won the national championship. In 2021, Georgia actually cracked the top 10. Georgia was 7th in the country in plays of 20 or more yards with a total of 80 on the season. But wait, there's more. This past season, and this is why y'all love Todd Monken, and you're right to feel this way, this past season, Georgia was number 1. Nobody in the country had more plays from scrimmage of 20 or more yards than Georgia did. They had a total of 98. So over the course of Monken's tenure at Georgia, they essentially doubled the number of plays in a season of 20 or more yards. That is what made Todd Monken an outstanding offensive coordinator. That, to me, is kind of the distillation of all of it. And this is the thing I think we all should agree on the Mike Bobo debate ought to matter here as well. That if Georgia's producing sort of 20-plus yard explosive type plays at a rate similar to what Todd Monken was over the course of his time there at Georgia's going to score plenty of points, and they're going to contribute. That's going to contribute to plenty of wins. So can we all agree on this here for a moment? If you're a Bobo skeptic, hear me say what you probably want somebody to say. Yes, his performance at Georgia ought to be evaluated. That it's one thing to sort of trust Kirby Smart on the front end of all this. Hey, Kirby's a great coach. Kirby gets to make the hire he wants to make. It's one thing to sort of trust Kirby on the front end of all of this. But what was it Ronald Reagan once said? Trust but verify. It's also important on the other side of this to now verify. I trust Kirby. He wants Mike Bobo to be the offensive coordinator. He gets to make the hire he wants to make. But on the other side of that, we're going to verify. We're going to see how the Bobo performance goes, and we're going to judge it. And to me, the fair way to judge it is with that stat that I just gave you. Those sort of explosive plays, however you define them, we're defining them now as plays of 20 or more yards. How many of those can Bobo get? If it's somewhere in that sort of 80-ish, 90-ish range, then at that point in time, you've got an offense that's pretty similar to what Todd Monken had here over the course of the last couple of years. And Georgia's performance on the field should be pretty similar there as well, with an offense that gives you a chance to be right back in that conversation for where every Dog fan wants to be in pursuit of a third straight national championship. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're glad to be with you today. Presented by Meriwether and Tharp, and live on video 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. After that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, from the radio at noon, on app and Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you can find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really, really happy to have you a part of what we're doing here today. And a big thanks to our friends at Meriwether and Tharp who make it all possible there as well. And listen, I love recommending Meriwether and Tharp because here's what I know. For the folks in our audience, sometimes you got happy things going on in your life and it's about celebrating and having a good time. And sometimes you've got personal challenges. And that's one of those things that is just real. That oftentimes, we talk about this a lot, sort of the twin pillars of life, that there's good things and there's not so good things. And sometimes kind of dealing with that sort of not so good thing is just one of those things that you have to confront. And if I can do anything to make that journey for you a little bit easier, obviously I'd want to do it. Now, if I could wave a magic wand and make it all go away, well, of course I'd do that, but we all know I can't do that. You can't do that. You've tried everything you can to make it disappear, and that challenging situation for you is just not going away. And for those of you who've been with us for a long time, you know what I'm talking about here. The idea that you might be dealing with a divorce situation. And if you can save your marriage, I really believe you should. I do truly believe that. But if you're listening closer to what I'm saying right now, you may have come to the realization that, hey, I've tried to save it, but it's just not going to happen. So what's next? Well, I'm not exactly sure what's next for you, but I do think a free initial consultation with one of our attorneys' friends over at Meriwether and Tharp can help you get clarity on what might be next for you, because the law is this like ponderous, complicated thing. But understanding the law and understanding how the law can be leveraged for your benefit when it comes to the issues in your life that might matter most, your relationships, including those with your children, your finances, and the way in which you take care of your children going forward, all of those things can be better understood by having one of these initial consultations with a Meriwether and Tharp attorney. I know people who have gone through this. I know people who have used Meriwether and Tharp to kind of walk with them as their advocate through this, and they are glad they did that. They may not be happy they got divorced, but they are glad they had Meriwether and Tharp to help them go through their divorce. And y'all, that is a very valuable service. So I have a hearty recommendation for Meriwether and Tharp on this show for anyone who might be considering dealing with a divorce situation. In fact, I want to invite you to check them out online, theatlantadivorceteam.com, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Here is how you know that Meriwether and Tharp does right by people. Because of all of the free resources they give away on their website before you even make the decision to hire Meriwether and Tharp as your divorce attorney. You can engage with blog posts and podcasts and all kinds of things that sort of educate you about the process prior to making that decision to hire Meriwether and Tharp as your divorce attorney. You can check all of that out online. Once again, Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, so coming up in a moment, we're going to hear from Terrence Edwards here on this show. And Terrence is going to have, I believe, some very interesting things to say about the Mike Bobo hire. This is obviously a topic that's very interesting to Terrence, and Terrence knows Bobo well, having been a part of a Georgia team that Bobo was on the coaching staff for. So I'm very curious to hear what Terrence Edwards has to say about all of this coming up in a moment. Let me do one kind of housekeeping thing here very, very quick, and then I want to roll on and talk more about this topic myself. So we've obviously had kind of a weird week. I was gone Monday because that was the day I learned that my grandmother passed away. I was gone yesterday because that was the funeral. And for a long time now, many of you are kind of aware of this, we've had some vacation planned. So today is actually the last live show we're going to do this week. Tomorrow is a outstanding pre-recorded show. Y'all, we have worked so hard. And listen, I've had such a great team of people helping me out with this. Obviously, Michael Carvell, our regular producer, Kaylee Manziel, who's been with us now. She's helped out in a big way on this. The entire DawgNation team, Mike Griffith, Jeff Santel, Connor Riley, they've kind of helped us come together and produce some really good content. We try our absolute best to create good shows to air while I can't be here, and hopefully you'll listen in, tune in, and sort of feel that way yourself, that, you know what, hey, we got the full effort here, even though this was a pre-recorded show. I am really, really grateful that the Mike Bobo news came out prior to me leaving, because now the shows will obviously sound less dated because that big thing we're waiting on has now happened. So, you know, that's kind of all going on there. So the point is that we're going to have shows for you over the course of the next few days, but starting tomorrow and then for the week that follows, they will be pre-recorded, and then I'll be back with you on the following Monday, obviously getting ready to go, and all systems pointed towards spring practice there after that. So that's kind of what's on the forefront here, and we appreciate your patience as we slip away and enjoy a little bit of vacation time over the course of the next few days. All right, that's it. Let me go around the DawgHouse here for just a moment. Now, I started the show by saying I feel like I'm pretty good at understanding the point of view sometimes of other people. And while I don't agree with the anti-Mike Bobo faction, I sort of understand where they're coming from a little bit. And I told you that if you're a Georgia fan who loved the idea of Todd Monken's arrival as kind of the outside voice, this is what for those of you that follow politics, like, this is the outside candidate. You know, this is not the establishment candidate. You know, Todd Monken sort of arrived at Georgia as a little bit of the outsider candidate. He's not a part of the establishment. He's not in the what wasn't in the insiders club. Kind of brought a little saltiness with him. Kind of stirred the pot a little bit maybe. And I think for a lot of Georgia fans, they sort of felt like that was kind of a good thing. And if Mike Bobo sort of feels like a little bit more establishment than that, or maybe in some cases a lot more establishment than that, I sort of understand why that's not everybody's cup of tea. I really, truly do. I don't agree with you, and I think that some of you are kind of irrational, but I still sort of understand where you're coming from. And I understand where you're coming from so much that, you know, Aaron Murray goes on social media. He touts Mike Bobo. That doesn't mean anything to you because Murray and Bobo are like guys. Like you know, like Bobo was his coach. Well, of course, you know, if you're a guy like Murray and you succeeded under Bobo, of course you think he's a good coach, and of course you'd want to vouch for him. You know, to some of you, all that is, even though you may like Murray and maybe to some degree even like Bobo, to some of you, all that sort of feels like is one member of the club protecting some other member of the club. I kind of get that. DJ Shockley, listen, I don't know anybody that doesn't love DJ Shockley. Not like love. I don't know anybody who doesn't love DJ Shockley. But when Shockley steps up and touts Mike Bobo, as he has recently, there is also, I think for some of you, this thought of, well, DJ's in the club, Mike Bobo is in the club. This is just guys in the club sort of sticking up for each other. I sort of get the idea that if you were in love with the outsider candidate, Todd Monken, then, guys in the club sort of vouching for one of their own, that doesn't necessarily resonate with you all that well. So let me kind of give you something slightly different here for a moment. Let's hear from a player that didn't play for Mike Bobo, because Mike Bobo left Georgia after the 2014 season. Jake Fromm came to Georgia at the start of the 2017 season. So Jake Fromm, you would be left to believe, is a little bit more of an objective voice on this, maybe, than some of the players that maybe played for Mike Bobo. Now, I actually have enjoyed hearing from Aaron Murray this week and DJ Shockley this week. I saw a great tweet from Keith Marshall earlier this week where Marshall was getting all over the anti-Bobo folks. I enjoy hearing from those voices. But if you're anti-Bobo because you think Bobo is just a little too inside the club, then guys who are also sort of inside the club vouching for Bobo, that doesn't mean as much to you. I do get where you're coming from, even if I don't agree with you. But Jake Fromm and Mike Bobo are not in the same club. Jake Fromm came to Georgia after Bobo had already gone. Now, put yourself back in the position of, like, whatever sport you may have played. I'm talking about, like, high school level or whatever else. It doesn't have to be college level. Anything that happened before you got there seemed old, right? I don't care if a guy was like 3 years before you or a coach was like a few years before you. Whatever happened before you got there just sort of seemed like ancient history. So Jake Fromm, I think, could be forgiven if he sort of viewed Mike Bobo as ancient history, viewed Mike Bobo as some kind of bygone era that was maybe less successful than Fromm's era was, because Fromm played for a national championship, won an SEC, went to a Rose Bowl, won that game. Fromm, you would be left to believe, does not necessarily have as automatic a tie-in to Mike Bobo. They are not in the same club because they were at Georgia at different times. And yet on our show on Tuesday, late, that's right when we found out that the Todd Monken news happened. It was prior to the Mike Bobo news becoming official, but we had reason to believe it was maybe heading that way. And Jake Fromm spoke up openly to begin with about his belief that Mike Bobo would probably be the right guy for the job. This is what Jake said Tuesday.
I mean, in my opinion, he would be my front runner to get it. I mean, he's got plenty of experience. He's been the offensive coordinator here before in the past, had a lot of success. He's a proven play caller, and that's something that really can't be taken for granted as a proven play caller in this day and time of college football. So he'd be the guy at the top of my head right now.
The word that Jake uses there is really, really valuable. Proven play caller. Y'all, this is not a time for on-the-job training. It's not. It's not. At this level, this is not a time to – I don't care how easy the schedule seems to be on paper. This is a Georgia team that's won the last two national championships. They're going to be preseason number one. They are going to obviously be the favorite to win the championship again this year. Whether they do or not, we'll find out, but they're going to be favored to do that. This is not a time for on-the-job training. And Jake Fromm says Mike Bobo brings the experience to the position that Georgia needs. And then he went on to also kind of talk about it a little bit as a quarterback, as a guy who studies offense, what he has seen from Mike Bobo offenses. And once again, from Jake Fromm, I think this is very interesting.
Coach Bobo, he's definitely utilized his tight ends in his past, knows how to use tight ends. He's great at the play action, scheme, and passing game. And I think, him going off, being a head coach, learning from those experiences, being a quarterback coach under Todd Monken, being able to kind of use some of that scheme that Coach Monken was using, and then being a play caller before. And then, Coach Bobo, he loves Georgia, too. I mean, his family grew up in the state of Georgia. They love Georgia, so what he's going to want to do is be his best for the university here.
So here's my hope. And as I said before, there's a very good chance that everything I'm trying today is going to fail. But here's my hope. I hope a statement like that from Jake Fromm can bring in the entirety of DawgNation together. A guy like Jake Fromm, who is not necessarily a guy that's obviously connected to Bobo. They just sort of share a common love for UGA, different eras. They both love Georgia, but it's not like Fromm played for Bobo or anything in a situation like that. But Jake says, hey, this is a guy who I've seen utilize tight ends. That's an important thing to do at a place like Georgia, and not every offensive coordinator is capable of doing it. It's one of the things that Alabama supposedly kind of sought out with Tommy Rees, the ability to kind of use a tight end, because not every offensive coordinator apparently can do that. Jake says Bobo can. That's obviously important to Georgia because of the kinds of tight ends this program has. Also, that love for UGA, a chance to have been around Todd Monken, maybe absorbing some of the things that Monken does, maybe utilizing some of the same tactics on the field that Todd Monken has utilized, to the tune of 98 explosive plays a year ago, plays of 20 or more yards. The argument in favor of Bobo by Fromm really works on me. Now, I also kind of already am more pro-Bobo than a lot of you are. But if you're more anti-Bobo, can you hear that? Can you listen to that? Can you treat that as a slightly more objective voice? Because, listen, it's not like Jake on this show is always towing the company line. He told you last week that he sort of thought that Georgia needed to figure out who its offensive coordinator is going to be, that if you're a quarterback, you want to know that. So it's not like, Jake is always just necessarily towing the company line right down the line there. But in his particular case, it seems like he thinks Mike Bobo is a pretty good hire. And obviously the results will speak for themselves. We'll be judging them closely. But hopefully today, maybe a little bit of common ground from the various warring factions among UGA fans. Either way, it's good to have you here on our program today and on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We want to keep this conversation going because another guy who does know Mike very well, who obviously knows the need to create and continue to produce the explosive offense for which Georgia's been famous for the last couple of years, is our great friend Terrence Edwards. Let's keep this conversation going with him here right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A little late getting to Terrence Edwards. I certainly apologize for that. Terrence always so good to join us, and we want to be respectful of his time. And obviously, we got a lot to talk about here today. Terrence, before we get into the hot topic, the Mike Bobo stuff, I want to go back in time a little bit because, man, I had a chance to be with you on Friday night, and I got to tell you, this was one of the most inspiring evenings I've had in a while. Night to Shine is an event that's been going on now for a couple of years. We don't love Florida Gators, but we do think that Tim Tebow does a great thing here. This is an organization and an event that he started. It's prom nights taking place at various locations all across the country, including a handful here in the Atlanta area there as well. We were over in Dunwoody for a great event this past Friday. And what it is, it's basically like a prom night for special needs kids, and there's the limousine ride, there's the dress up, there's the dancing, there's all the stuff that you kind of want from a prom experience in this special environment for some of these folks. And I just thought it was an amazing evening. I'm going to talk more about this at DawgNation.com when I get a chance. Obviously, I've been away from work here for a couple of days, but just an amazing evening. And one of the things I loved so much was, we're going to show this photo here in a moment, I guess John Stinchcomb going to help spearhead a lot of this kind of stuff, but you had John there, his brother Matt was there, you had George Foster who was there, you had Charles Grant who was there, so much fun hanging out with those guys. You were there, Moose Smith, the great former Georgia running back, was on hand. And Terrence, seeing all of you guys in that element, really showing a lot of love to these kids and their families. Man, this was an amazing night. What did it mean to you personally?
I'm going to tell you how much it meant to me that I was there 24 hours early. You don't know this, B.A., but I actually went Thursday night thinking the event was Thursday, and I called John. I'm like, John, where's everybody at? He's like, Terrence, it's tomorrow, Friday. So I was so ready for the event that I went 24 hours early for the event, but I had an awesome time. I said this on my social media. I think the players had more fun than the kids did because, man, it was a special night, just special to get to see those kids smile and have a good time, and they brought joy to me, even probably more than I brought joy to them.
I think I maybe failed to give credit to our buddy David Green, our good friend, who was also there as well. Dave was right there in the middle of all that too. So it's great to see. It was a fun night. I'm going to tell more of that story at DawgNation.com. But I'll brag on Terrence and these other guys for a moment. Y'all, you would have been so proud of the way in which they were escorting the folks, because you make kind of a long line to kind of, it's almost like you got cheering on both sides, just really celebrating and making everybody feel loved and valued who was there. I got to tell you, Terrence and all these former Georgia players, they were right in the middle of all of that. It was so much fun to see. Some of these guys I knew really well. Guys like Charles Grant, George Foster, I did not know nearly as well. I had a chance to hang out with them, get to know them a little bit. Moose Smith there too. It's just such a moving evening. It was really, really good, really, really special. We always love it around here when these great players, whether they be current Georgia players, former Georgia players, when they use their platform for something like that, we're always really proud, and that's exactly what those guys did going back to this past Friday. All right, so Terrence, with that said, let's get to the hot topic here at hand. Since you and I last spoke, there's been a lot of change here at Georgia. We find out that Todd Monken is leaving. He is going on to the NFL. I'll talk to you more about that part in a moment. But we also find out that his replacement, as a lot of folks would have expected it would be, is now Mike Bobo. You know Coach Bobo very well. What are your thoughts on this hire?
Well, I'm very excited about the hire. One thing that I've learned, just listen to the show, social media, doesn't matter what I say, doesn't matter what Jake Fromm or DJ or any of the guys say, people already have formed their opinion on Mike because of his past. But I can say this, if he's a predictable run-first guy, Aaron Murray wouldn't have 13,000 yards passing. He wouldn't have 121 passing touchdowns in his team. So he's doing something right to lead our offense in the way that he has done. And I can say this, as an offensive coach, we all mature and learn from others. That's what coaches are. We grow once we're around other great coaches. And he has had the opportunity to be around Coach Monken for this year and a half. And I can say this, I'm pretty sure and I'm pretty positive, the terminology will stay the same. I don't think there's a coach, I don't think Kirby wanted to change that the whole program has to learn new terminology, so he's just going to have Bobo come in. Bobo's probably going to put his own twists and turns to the offense to where he sees in his vision, but the terminology, the run game, everything will stay the same. And I'm excited for Bobo. I'm excited. And I said this last time. Bobo, as a play caller, did not have this talent on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
And once, as a play caller, you have this type of talent, you don't have to press and have to call the perfect play. You can let the game flow knowing that your defense has your back. So I'm just excited. I text Coach Bobo. I text Coach Monken. So both of them return my text, and I have much respect for both of those guys.
Well, that's great to hear. I want to go through a couple of things here on this. First of all, going back to your time at Georgia, this have been early days for Bobo as a coach prior to becoming offensive coordinator, but you're playing wide receiver. I guess he's more working with quarterbacks. How much interaction did you have with him when he was a young coach and you were in the middle of your, nearing the end of your Georgia career?
Well, I'm a little different because I've known Bobo since him and Robert were seniors together.
Right.
Mike Bobo is my nephew's godfather, so I've had the pleasure of knowing Bobo for a long time. And so our relationship when I was a player, he's the quarterback coach, was a little different. So I've interacted with him a lot throughout my playing days, and he was the quarterback coach. So Coach John Eason was the receiver coach at the time. And, he's a young guy, eager, and just knows football. And that's one thing about that. He loves Georgia, and he loves football. So I'm excited about it. I'm anxious to see, his wrinkles he's going to put up. But the terminology, the play callers, everything's going to stay the same. So everyone now, and it's big. Think about this, though, Bill. If we brought in another offensive coordinator while breaking in new quarterbacks, I don't think that would have been the best now. You bringing in a coach that's already on staff, and these guys do not have to learn a new offense, new signals, new verbiage. That is going to go big with the players that we have right now. Yeah,
I think that's interesting. I mean, to kind of follow up on that point, how do you think the presence of Bobo here changes the quarterback competition? Because obviously, while there may be a little bit different, there's certainly a different pair of eyes evaluating these quarterbacks. There is some continuity here from the fact that Bobo's been here and the fact that we know that Bobo and Kirby have a close working relationship with each other because they have a close relationship already. So, how does this change, for better, for worse, whatever, this quarterback competition that's about to to be undergone here to replace Stetson Bennett as the starter?
Right. So I think Bobo is going to have his own sets of eyes and what he thinks the quarterback position should be. But at the end of the day, I think Kirby is going to ultimately be the decision maker. He's going to take in all the information. I believe he will allow the coaches to have their input and what the coaches. But at the end of the day, I think the buck still stop with Kirby, and whoever Kirby feels is playing the best from the data that the coaches present to him, that would be the quarterback that we like. I think Carson is going to get the first shot to be our starter, but I think it's still going to be an open competition. And I don't think they will name a quarterback. We probably won't know who's going to start until they announce it the first game, because I think all the quarterbacks would get a fair shot to be named the starter.
So let's talk about the Todd Monken part of this here for a moment. I mean, I think the one thing that you just have to conclude from this, and this is one of those things that if you're, I think, a Georgia fan or a college football fan, you're going to have to kind of make peace with a little bit, is that Todd Monken seemed very intent about returning to the NFL. Interviewing with the Tampa Bay Bucks, I think you and I would say right now that doesn't look like such a great situation. The Baltimore Ravens, kind of a sort of a murky situation there. At least we know that John Harbaugh is kind of an entrenched head coach because he's won a Super Bowl. You'd assume that he's got a little bit more of rope there at Baltimore, but you don't really know about Lamar Jackson's future, and yet nonetheless, Todd Monken leaping at the chance to go there. Terrence, I think the only thing you conclude is, hey, you're lucky you got 3 years out of this guy, because pretty obviously, he only viewed, the best that I can tell, college football as a stopover to kind of get back to the NFL, which is where he really wanted to be. And when you have this kind of conversation, I think that's got to be a part of this is that Monken just really, really likes the NFL and likes some of the stuff that makes that league different than what college football is all about right now.
I think so. I sent him a text and just thanking him for what he did for our university in these three years and helping us, get back to where we all want our university to be, and that's national champs. But I think it's evident and documented that the recruiting part of it is not his favorite from, what I've heard. You don't have to do that in NFL. You don't have to go out and woo kids and their parents and be a used car salesman in a sense to get these kids to come to your school. So I think that part is something that he didn't enjoy, and you don't have to do that in the NFL. So I think that's probably the difference in the two leagues is you don't have to recruit in the NFL. You draft the players you want. In college, you have to go get them, and you have to convince them that you are the place they need to be. And those are things that, from what I've been told, that not his forte.
I think you may be right about that. And it also kind of, I guess, leads me to say that, okay, so for the people who are talking about potential replacements for him when he left, prior to the Bobo announcement, we'll go out and get the next big name from the NFL. And, Terrence, here's the thing that I think you have to kind of conclude from some of this, is that there are also a lot of other people who feel the same way that Todd Monken does for some of the same reasons you just mentioned. People talk about Joe Brady. Brady, former passing game coordinator with LSU in 2019, goes to the NFL, fails as head coach with the Carolina Panthers. Now he's quarterback's coach with the Bills. That's a guy that still has a big-time reputation in college, whereas maybe not quite so much so in the NFL. But you don't get any impression he has any desire to return to the college game whatsoever. Cliff Kingsbury kind of the same way of, Kingsbury sort of thought to be this sort of, potential savior in waiting for the Alabama offense. I don't get the impression that the Kingsbury was even returning their calls. If those calls were extended, I don't get the impression that Kingsbury was returning them. There are just a lot of coaches right now that look at what's going on in college football, the challenge of being on call 365 days out of the year, the pressure that comes from, crazy fans like, me and others who, puts such a big spotlight on all these guys. There are a lot of people who say, man, everything about the NFL is better than this because this is just a really, really hard job. And if you want to make a list of, the guys from the NFL that you can go out and hire, I don't think they want much of a part of this right now. Let's not forget that Monken was available because his coaching staff got ran out of Cleveland. Otherwise, he would have probably just stayed in that league to begin with. Right.
And for Cliff, Kingsbury is a good friend of mine, and I don't know if he would come back for one reason. He has a contract that needs to be paid by the Arizona Cardinals, and I don't know how that works if he takes a job that he doesn't get that money. And he just signed an extension with the Arizona Cardinals like last year, so he has a lot of money coming his way, and he don't have to do anything but sit there and collect this money. So Joe Brady, I've known Joe Brady, and people call his name, and we saw the 1 year with that exceptional talent that he had, and I was, going back and forth with people on Twitter one time, like, besides that LSU year, what else have Joe Brady done? And that's no shot at him, or I like him. He went to the NFL as well, and no one has really, from what I've heard, really called barking on his door. I think he's a good offense coordinator, but what have he proved? And I was listening to the show earlier, and one thing that Jake Fromm said is an experienced play caller. But the two differences in the league is you don't have to recruit and have to be on the road so much. In the NFL, you don't.
I think that's exactly right. Let me squeeze in one thing here very quick before we let you go. As a coach yourself, if you're Mike Bobo, how much of this do you think ends up being, hey, we're going to just sort of take what Todd Monken used and what worked for him, and we're going to try to sort of replicate that now with a new coach? And then how much of that is, hey, I want to make sure I put my own stamp on this, my own wrinkles on this, that I want to make sure I'm comfortable calling the kinds of plays that I've been comfortable calling in the past? In other words, how much of this is just sort of taking the Monken playbook and turning the next page and going right on with it, and how much of this is really introducing some new ideas because Bobo is a different person?
I think the terminology and the play calls, the run game play calls, everything will stay the same. I just think Bobo now, he's going to call the plays in his vision. But the terminology of the play, just think about, like, there's not a lot of concepts out there that are just magical. Everybody runs the same concepts. Everybody runs, but they're run in a different way. You got to understand when to call, what hash to call them on, what defense to call it against, what down. Like, there's a lot of things that go into play calling. And it's just not, I'm going to pick a play and let's call this play and hope it works. No, it goes deeper than that. There's numbers and tendencies that we all look out through the week, and he's going to call it based on the prep work throughout the week and their film study. But I think the terminology of the plays is going to stay the same. So everyone don't have to learn a new playbook, but he's going to put his spin on it and call it the way he feels comfortable in calling it.
Terrence, this is such a great conversation. We really appreciate your insight into all of this. Thank you so much. And obviously, speaking of coaching, you're doing a great job coaching guys right now with that Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, working on catching the football, getting better this time of year. We're still a little bit ahead of the start of spring practice high school football. And obviously, guys want to be in position to move up those depth charts when all that begins and gets going. So, Terrence, how can they get in touch with you, or the families of those players get in touch with you to get some of that special personalized instruction that you provide?
You can reach me at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. And if there's anyone in the LaGrange Troop area,
okay,
I will be exploring going to that area as well.
Wow.
So if there's anyone in the LaGrange Troop area, I've been contacted to come do some training sessions down there, and maybe I will this weekend, but I will be in the future. So if there's anyone in the LaGrange, Troop County area, you can contact me on all my social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
I mean, listen, Terrence is, you talk about, moving up in the world. Terrence is like the McDonald's of personal coaching. He's got franchises. He's got franchises open up all across the state of Georgia. Terrence, that is great to be able to hear. I'm happy to know that that's the situation there. And, of course, we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, pretty soon you'll see a TE Wide Receiver Academy, Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, kind of all across the state there. Maybe we can kind of get on that. Maybe I can be like, what do you call it? Are you the master franchiser when you kind of like control like a region? Maybe that's what I'll be. Maybe I'll be the master franchiser for some of that kind of stuff. Not a bad thing there. That's good to know for our good friend Terrence Edwards. Now, as we get ready to go cruise around the SEC, I am happy to say that, listen, when it comes to our sponsors around here, I try to put my money where my mouth is. I do not recommend a service that I don't use, wouldn't use, whatever else, and that is especially true for our friends at Royal Caribbean. So my family, we are getting ready to be on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship coming up this weekend, and man, oh man, am I excited about that. And I don't say that to brag, because obviously I'm very lucky to be able to take vacation, and many of you are kind of hoping to kind of get some time away from work and do all that kind of stuff there as well. I just am very thankful for this opportunity, and I do honestly, genuinely hope you get a chance to enjoy this yourself. And I realize that when it comes to a vacation experience, how precious your time is and your money is. You don't want to make the wrong decision when it comes to, vacation costs kind of go up from time to time, or when you finally get a chance to be away from work, you want to make that the most enjoyable experience possible, especially if you got kids. You want to have that close connection with them and really make the most of the opportunity. And I do truly, authentically believe that a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is a great way for you to do all of that, because it's sort of got something for everybody. And that's, as we kind of build towards this for ourselves, You got the specialty restaurants, you got the main dining room, you got the great food, and we talk a lot about the food. We talk a lot about the food around my house, about what we're going to be eating, what we're going to be enjoying. But it's also the entertainment options, whether it be the water slides up there on the pool deck, or like the shows at night. The Aqua Theater where you have the high diving show, or like the Studio B where you have the ice skating show. My daughter's so excited about that kind of stuff, and the ports that you visit. It's just a wonderful, wonderful experience with kind of a one-stop shop for everything you could ever imagine. Live music, great Broadway-style shows, wonderful restaurants and food, obviously the bars and lounges for the parents to enjoy. Just so much going on. So the travel agent who helped us book our Royal Caribbean cruise is a fantastic friend of mine named Jessica Slater. I want you to give her a call. 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. She can walk you through all of the options you have right now when it comes to Royal Caribbean, including the video you see on your screen of Icon of the Seas, debuting January 2024. That's an exciting thing to think about there as well. And you can also check out the website that Jessica's put together, royaldogs.com. That is royaldogs.com. And find out more about the DawgNation cruise we have coming up. I know a lot of y'all getting really excited about that. There was a great meeting earlier this week where folks kind of having that chat about what's going to be like on board Independence of the Seas. And just know this, as excited as I am about my cruise right now, I'm also looking forward to being with all of you as a part of that coming up this April there as well. So that said, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean right now. And I saw this the other day where Pro Football Focus, based on its grading system, has graded the top 10 returning linebackers for the upcoming year. Obviously, a Georgia guy on this list. At some point in time, we're talking about a Georgia guy not on the list, but I'm going to save that for another time. Let me show you this here for a minute, though, from Pro Football Focus. Top 10 linebackers in college football for the upcoming season. You see Jeremiah Trotter, number 1 on that list. Javon Dumas-Johnson, number 4. Seems a little low for him, but whatever. We'll let that go here for right now. But the other name on this list is Harold Perkins from LSU, coming in at number 2, ahead of Tommy Eichenberg from Ohio State, and just behind Trotter, who we mentioned a moment ago. Now, listen, is there a chance that Javon Dumas-Johnson is better than Harold Perkins? Maybe so, maybe not. I don't know. We'll see about all of that. I obviously think Georgia fans are very happy with their guy, Javon Dumas-Johnson. So let's just say that for right now, that pretty clearly when it comes to the guy they call Pop, to have one of the best linebackers coming back for Georgia this upcoming season is a very big deal. Now, as I said before, the fact that Smile Monen's not on this list is a little bit weird, but we'll get to that at some point in time. It's actually Perkins I want to talk about just for a moment because this is cruising around the SEC. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of starting to evolve on here a little bit is that LSU, I do think, has a chance to be a very good team again in 2023. Kind of taking that sort of year 2 next step when it comes to Brian Kelly, because the idea of the next step is a big issue facing a lot of SEC teams. Josh Heupel at Tennessee, even to a certain degree, a guy like Shane Beamer at South Carolina, because they got some big wins at the end of last season. A lot of programs want to take that next step, or the place that they have been, can you finally sort of break out of that? A Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss might be, relevant in this conversation. They've won games, they've gone to bowls, things like that. But can you actually be a contender? Can you actually do more than that? They want to take that next step there as well. Of all the sort of so-called potential next step teams in the SEC, I do think that LSU is in the best position of all of them. And it's not just because they won the division a year ago. If anything, that makes the next step for them even more challenging to take. The next step is like legitimate playoff contender status. But I think that LSU, when you think about Perkins on defense, when you think about what they might be able to do with kind of a pair of interesting quarterbacks, and obviously the overall talent level in the program and what Brian Kelly brings as a coach, I think that LSU taking that next step is I would say, far and away more likely than some of the other teams that I mentioned, including Tennessee, even though Tennessee beat them this past year. I believe that I like the future of LSU in terms of actually being a playoff contender. I believe I like the future of LSU more than I like the immediate future for Tennessee. So if you say it this way, the other day we talked on the show about those ESPN playoff predictions where almost everybody had Georgia, a lot of folks had Alabama there as well. And, we've been kind of knocking on the door. It's been Georgia, Alabama, in terms of perennial playoff contenders in the SEC for quite some time. But we've been knocking on the door beyond that of kind of adding a third team into the playoff mix from the SEC, and eventually they're going to be 12-team playoff, year after next. There's going to be a 12-team playoff, 2024, a 12-team playoff, so you may actually see 3 SEC teams in the playoff then. But for now, in this sort of 4-team age in which we've lived in, it's been Georgia and Alabama making the playoff a couple times together and certainly perennially competing for the playoff. But you've also seen, in 2020, Florida thought it might be there for a little bit. Texas A&M actually in that same year thought it might be there for a little bit. Tennessee thought it might be there last year, and eventually they sort of fall by the wayside and sort of prove unworthy of all of that. But they've kind of pushed their way into that discussion. So I'll tell you that if you're going to rubber stamp Georgia, which you probably should, if you're going to rubber stamp Alabama, which whether you should or you shouldn't, media seems intent on doing it, and you're looking for, okay, who's that third SEC team that could compete for the playoffs? Tennessee fans have their hand in the air. They want it to be them. They say it is them. For me, it's more so LSU than Tennessee, even though Tennessee beat LSU head-to-head a year ago. By the way, speaking of Alabama, I saw this. I guess there's some reports out there that Alabama could be close to hiring Ken Wisenhunt. Wisenhunt, former head coach in Arizona, the Cardinals. Is that the case here? Played at Tech, but guy's got a long time tied to the NFL. Wisenhunt could be hired as an analyst, kind of one of those quality control guys there at Alabama. And I think this analyst role is obviously become very important. I would say that, guys like Buster Faulkner and Mike Bobo and the various names that Georgia has had in kind of that support staff role have been a big part of Georgia's championship run the last couple of years. So we know that the analyst role is important. Now, we also know it can be overblown because if you go back and look at the team picture, I wish I had this to show you. The team picture for Florida last year when they had more analysts than players, I'm not really quite so sure having 1 million analysts is necessarily all that valuable, but having a handful of really sharp guys probably really does matter to you, and a guy like Wisenhunt kind of brings some of that experience for Alabama. So we see this becoming an important role in college football. The best teams have good analysts. This is Alabama potentially hiring another good one. You would think that Wisenhunt has a chance to be a good one. And then beyond that, here's the other thing I think it's also true too. I think we see the notion of being the quality control guy, the analyst. I think we see that becoming a pretty attractive job for coaches who sort of had a taste of the other and they realize they don't want that anymore because, listen, most coaches love coaching. Most coaches love coaching as it is defined by being around other coaches and being around players. They love that part of it. There are a lot of coaches who get really, really tired, especially a lot of my friends are high school coaches. They get really, really tired of the grind of having to deal with all the stuff. We'll just call it stuff. All of the stuff that high school coaches have to deal with. Eventually, they get tired of that part of it. They still like coaching. They like being around other coaches. They like being around players. They just like some of the stuff that exists around the periphery on all of that. And I would say at the college and pro level, there's probably some version of that too, where, hey, if I can be around a team, I'll make less money, but it's still some money. Will Muschamp, I think, when he was an analyst here at Georgia, he made about $300,000. That's not small change necessarily. But if I can be around a team, if I can be around other coaches without having to deal with kind of the, once again, stuff that you have to deal with when it comes to a lot of this kind of situation, then you see guys kind of like that right now. And so maybe an example of both those things being true there for a moment. Finally, there is this. Finally, there is this. So we talked the other day about Notre Dame and trying to hire offensive coordinator, and you thought they might be going to take the Utah offensive coordinator. There's a little bit of a buyout associated with that. Notre Dame seemingly balked on paying for that. That kind of got a little bit weird there for a minute. And so ultimately he ended up not coming. And it looks like Notre Dame, as a replacement for Tommy Rees, who moves on to Alabama, it looks like Notre Dame is getting ready to maybe promote their tight ends coach. This guy used to play wide receiver in the SEC. His name is Gerard Parker. I believe I have that right. Gerard Parker, former Kentucky wide receiver, tight ends coach there at Notre Dame, looking to get the promotion as Notre Dame offensive coordinator quite possibly. We said this the other day, is that the divide between programs who are kind of willing to spend money and not seems to be growing here. Now, I didn't say the chasm between those who have and don't have money, because Notre Dame's got plenty of money, but it sort of seems like they're not really willing to spend it. And, it is a major blight on you when you have a coach like Brian Kelly, who had been to a couple of playoffs at Notre Dame, but during the season with the chance of being the playoff again, just tucked tail and left the program because by appearances, it certainly seemed like he realized that his chance of winning a national championship was never going to come to fruition at a place like Notre Dame. And part of that is obviously the access to talent, although the Notre Dame recruits better than not. But in some cases, the willingness to kind of do what is required to compete at the highest level. Losing a guy like Tommy Rees to Alabama and replacing him with the tight ends coach, I don't quite know if that's a championship move there from the Fighting Irish. But nonetheless, an interesting decision if it indeed does kind of play out that way former SEC wide receiver, maybe getting a promotion there at Notre Dame, will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I want to show you something cool here. So you've heard me talk about this before, the Jittery Joe's back-to-back national championship coffee can. Now, a lot of people, and I'm kind of the same way on this, we want to get our hands on as much national championship stuff as we can possibly get. And these sort of things like this look great. You sort of sit it on your desk, on your shelf, or, right here on the, let's see if I can get that thing right there on the, there you go. See if I can get that right there on the camera. We're not quite lined up there on that. But either way, the national championship back-to-back Jittery Joe's coffee can logo here is such a cool, amazing thing. On the back, it says back-to-back national champions. It also gives you all the years in which Georgia's won the national championship past. Really, really good stuff. Now, the other cool thing about this is that the Jittery Joe's coffee can also comes with Jittery Joe's coffee on the inside. This is a double value here. The tin itself is a collector's item, and I'm certainly you're going to want to do that. See, we got the big power G there on the front, the lid there, which looks really good. So the tin itself is a collector's item, but inside you've got the great tasting Jittery Joe's coffee. So many of you already know this, enjoy this. This is like that really special, unique blend of Arabica beans coming from Colombia, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, places that are famous for making great coffee. And of course, Jittery Joe's has had great coffee for a long time. And now they've got that great coffee ready for you inside this commemorative tin here, celebrating Georgia's back-to-back national championships. Now, as you might imagine, this is an incredibly limited edition item. This is not going to last very long. This national championship stuff always sells out so quick. The Jittery Joe's offer here going to sell out very quick there as well. So go to jitteryjoes.com to find out more about this. jitteryjoes.com. This is a really cool thing. Great coffee inside a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful commemorative tin here. Jittery Joe's actually partnered with UGA on this. So this is officially licensed, limited edition, celebrating that back-to-back national championships. Good stuff from Jittery Joe's. I want you to check this out today. It's jitteryjoes.com. That's the website, jitteryjoes.com, and you can find out more about that. All right, so final golden shoe for us in the live version of things here. Before we take a little bit of vacation time. Fun pre-recorded episodes coming up tomorrow and next week. Really excited about all of that. And I told you before, I'm very behind on a lot of my social media interactions because of what's been going on. So many of you have sent nice condolences because of my grandmother. To begin the week, it was my birthday. I got some really nice birthday messages then. I haven't had a chance to respond much on that either. Not trying to be rude or disrespectful. I just have been, dealing with a lot of family stuff here as of late. But I did kind of go back through my Twitter timeline. I found this I don't know, this may only be funny to me, but somebody sent this to me here, and I want to show this to you as a golden shoe here today. And I always, of course, love the username. It's got2and22, validated dog on Twitter, saying, DawgNation Daily, I couldn't help but think of you on this one. And so Mr. Late Breaking News shared this. It's a picture of Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. They're all, well-groomed and smiling. It says Texas and Oklahoma before joining the SEC. And then you see Hogan and Flair again down at the bottom, bleeding, cut from the forehead. They're all bloody and battered. And then it says Texas and Oklahoma after one season in the SEC. That is truly very funny and really good stuff there by Mr. Late Breaking News, who put that out, and then got2and22, who shared that with me. We'll give golden shoes all around on that. And by the way, lousy, stinking Gators, they know all about getting beaten up and cut up playing against the Georgia Bulldogs. And 254 days from right now, they're going to experience that again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We appreciate you being with us here today. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. So really good stuff. Glad to have them and glad to be back taking live comments with you. What will be our final time to do this here for a few days, as we mentioned before, but we'll make the most of this. Now, we're not going to go crazy long today because I have a little bit of finishing touches that I have to put on some of those pre-recorded shows. So we'll take care of some business on that. And then, but for now, though, I do want to take your comments and have a good time with you, all that. All right, let's see what else. B2B Visor says he wants to get one of those cans. Yeah, good. I hope that hope you're able to pick one of those up. I think it's really good stuff from our friends at Jittery Joe's. Let's see what else. Obviously, a lot of the Bobo stuff continuing on over here. Paul Moon says he's got one coming in today. That's awesome. Oh, let's see what else. Eric Haynes says there was so much talent wasted between Mike Bobo and Coach Mark Richt. So this is, I think, the thing that kind of comes like to the forefront for me in all of this. Obviously, that era, and we said it before, there's kind of sort of a split time when it comes to the Mark Richt era, two separately distinct eras. I think there's 2001 through 2007. That's the era in which Georgia was building itself up to be better than something had been in quite some time. Prior to Mark Richt becoming the Georgia coach, Georgia had gone 20 years without winning the SEC. Georgia won the SEC in Mark Richt's second season, won it again in 2005. There are a couple of disappointments in and around that, but that was a big level of performance for a Georgia team that had not tasted that level of success in quite some time. And then in 2007, man, Georgia had a couple of disappointing losses, and then you're like right there on the cusp of winning the national championship. At least you felt like, maybe had a case to even be in the BCS title game that year. So that's the first era for Mark Richt. It's sort of 2001 towards 2007 when it really seemed like Georgia was building something up under Mark Richt. Now, after that, and this is where you got to be honest, 2008 through 2015 was a different kind of era. 2008 started with preseason number 1, where this is the moment where Georgia makes good on all of the buildup that's been taking place, and they finally kick in the door and they win the national championship. And the 2008 season could not have been more disappointing. It just couldn't have been. It was a very disappointing season. And things kind of only got worse from there. 2009, 2010, 2011. They won the East in 2011. They still lost twice. 2012 kind of got close again, but I certainly wouldn't put that 2012 team in the same category of some of the ones that Kirby Smart's had in terms of their overall, level of strength. And then obviously after that, it was just sort of a far cry from really being a true championship contender. So let's focus in on the part of that Bobo was a part of. Let's look at 2008 through 2014, because that was Bobo's last year. That was clearly a disappointing era. Totally was. We all believed that Georgia had the potential to be something great, and they just weren't. It's a fact. I mean, anybody who was a part of it would say, yeah, we stopped short of being great. It's just an absolute objective fact. So my question would be this to Eric, who was the commenter on this, or anybody else. Is Mike Bobo the main reason that failed to happen? Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. We'll never know this. This is a little bit of a hypothetical, but I don't mind telling you this. I think what's actually true is that the presence of Mike Bobo, what Bobo did as offensive coordinator, actually made Georgia appear to be more of a championship contender than otherwise would have been. And Bobo's tenacity on the recruiting trail, I also think, made Georgia a little bit more of a presence than it kind of otherwise would have been. And that 2008 through 2014, a little bit of a disappointing era for Georgia. But the presence of Bobo actually kept it more respectable than it might have otherwise, would have been. And so that's what it comes down to me is, for some of you, Mike Bobo just has a little bit of a connection to a Georgia era that you'd kind of like to forget. Totally understand that, I guess, anyway. At least I partially understand it. But if you really want to go back and sort of relitigate that era, can anybody make the argument that Bobo didn't leave Georgia better than he found it, that in terms of what he did while he was offensive coordinator, he was more of a positive contributor to Georgia than the other way around? I would certainly think so. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, I really think that Bobo got better from Monken and vice versa. I think they might have taught each other a few new tricks. Good luck to Mike Bobo. I think you may be right about that, Jonathan. I think that's well said. Frank Patterson says, BA, the can't win with Bobo is the new can't win with Stetson, which was the old Fields should have started over from. Yeah, maybe in some ways you're kind of right about that. And that's part of the reason why I sort of framed the show to begin with today the way that I did, which was, and listen, I can't do a ton of this. I can't. But the most frustrating thing about the Stetson-Bennett conversation the previous 2 years was not the difference in opinions, because opinions are going to be different. It was the people who couldn't even agree upon what the facts were. That was so maddening. It was the fact that Georgia fans were seemingly sometimes divided over facts, not opinions. And, I just think when it comes to the Mike Bobo situation, it is fine to be on different sides of that. That's what shows like this exist. This is sports talk. Sports talk is about, I think this, you think that. Let's get on here and scream and yell about something that ultimately probably doesn't matter quite as much as we'd like for it to, because it's just something that's sort of fun to do. I get sports talk. I've devoted my entire life to sports talk. I love it. So I like the idea of debating different opinions. But I would like for us to be able to agree upon common facts. That's what I would like for us to be able to agree upon. And so that's sort of what I, kind of built the start of the show around today. Paul Moon also says, I've been saying I think the Bobo hire is a good hire, not the splash I was hoping for, and I don't even know who that would have been, which I do think is an important part of this. But he goes on to say, at this point, I trust Kirby and Bobo as a track record with quarterbacks. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is pretty close to the way that I feel. You always love the idea that some guy's going to ride in on some white horse and be, the ultimate offensive coordinator. I just don't believe that guy exists. I really don't. I mean, if he does, Alabama would have done everything it could to hire him, and that guy just not out there. Just not out there. Let me go over to YouTube. I should say Facebook for a minute. Let me go over to Facebook for a moment. We had a little bit of a Facebook issue the other day. I trust that everything's okay there today, though. Let us see. Appears to be in working order. Johnny Prescott says, I suppose the timing is everything. UGA could have been turned down by the Washington offensive coordinator and then gotten Tommy Rees and his 60th ranked offense. I suppose we had to settle for Mike Bobo. Yeah, so the other day I said this, that in the case of Rees, I'm willing to concede that he might be a better offensive coordinator than his resume suggests because Nick Saban has hired him. In other words, there's a certain degree to which I trust Kirby to hire Bobo here, and I would sort of trust Saban to hire Rees there as well. But there's no doubt on the basis of resume alone, I think that Mike Bobo looks like a more impressive hire. Now, I don't want to completely discount the South Carolina era, the Auburn era. I don't want to completely discount that when it comes to Mike Bobo. The Auburn thing I might discount a little bit more because, look, that's Brian Harsin. Everything about that was terrible. Harsin had to have a little bit of SEC validation, a little bit of SEC. He needed more SEC bona fides, and clearly that's what Mike Bobo provided. But nobody liked working with Brian Harsin. Everybody that worked with Brian Harsin hated it. So this idea that it didn't work for Bobo at Auburn with Brian Harsin, it didn't work for anybody at Auburn with Brian Harsin. So I don't necessarily hold that against him. The South Carolina thing, I think you can judge that a little bit more realistically. Probably should have done better, but I think if you go back and look at the Todd Monken resume, they're probably a bad year or two kind of in the mix on that there as well. You get a little bit of baggage, from a couple of different stops. So, a long coaching resume, they're not all filled with perfect games, So, yeah. Randy Hall and Pete Williams. I don't know that our buddy Brian Kelly went to Meriwether and Tharp to deal with his family issues. I don't know about that. That's funny though. David Thatch says we weren't going to keep Monken long. I think I'll choose to enjoy having a coach, offensive and defensive coordinator who all passionately love Georgia, and hope that having a staff who doesn't look at their position as a stepping stone to something else has more benefits than we realize. Yeah, I sort of agree with that, and I don't even think the Monken thing is necessarily negative. There is something to be said for I'm paying you to do a job. It's like I don't need my house painter to love me. I just need my house painted. And in the case of Georgia, it's nice when you have, that deep passion, not even for Georgia, just for college football, right? Not only did Monken, I think Monken probably liked living in Athens. I don't think he liked college football very much, the best that I can possibly tell, at least compared to the NFL. But as long as he's doing his job, I don't really care about that. I don't care what you're thinking. I just care what you're doing. And Monken was always doing well, doing his job. But now you don't keep guys like that forever. They sort of move on, and now he's moved on. I think, Georgia paid him well. He did his job well. Like that to me is just that's a transactional relationship. Georgia paid him well. Monken did well. Shake hands. You move on. And so now you got something a little bit different in place. All of a sudden now, and I'm a lot of y'all probably think I'm a geek, which is fine, but I am kind of a sentimental dude. And I do like the idea that, oh man, Bobo loves Georgia. That's what Jake Fromm said earlier. Bobo loves Georgia. I don't know that Bobo's not always loved everybody that's worked at Georgia, but he loves Georgia. We know that. Muschamp loves Georgia. Kirby loves Georgia. These guys have a common bond that is because of their love of Georgia, but they're also their love of like Georgia high school football and just football in general. They just they have that common bond, and that is kind of fun. It's going to be a different feel, different vibe. I'm thinking out loud. I'm trying to decide if I want to say this or not. I think I will. So let's say that Georgia wins a national championship this year. Would it be more fun to win a national championship with Will Muschamp as a defensive coordinator, co-DC, but Will Muschamp as a defensive coordinator and Mike Bobo as an offensive coordinator? Is that more fun than the situation in 2021 when you had Todd Monken as an offensive coordinator and Dan Lanning as a defensive coordinator? Now, listen, I love Lanning. I'm proud of Lanning. I can't wait to see where his career goes. Monken, I was really glad to have him because I think that Georgia needed him, and he came here and did the job he was paid to do. But if Georgia could win it in 2023 with Bobo and Muschamp, is that more fun for me? I think it probably would be. To kind of do it with some of your own. Let's see what else. Greg Childer says Bobo, does love Georgia, and he says it's also not fun to replace your coordinator for 2 years. And so, yeah, I mean, there's reason to believe that Mike Bobo might kind of park himself here. At least that's a possibility anyway. Matt Rukavina says, I'm hereby declaring the 2000, basically like from 2000 up to the 20 teens as, quote, the almost era of Georgia football, and it had some painful memories. It really did. It did. And I get the idea that someone closely connected to that era sort of has a little bit of a, I don't want to say stench, that's the wrong thing, but a little bit of a residue left over from that. That's probably the better way to say that. A little bit of residue left over. I do get that. And we did this with Stacey Searles a year ago. And listen, I came on the show. I was like, how many times we talked to John Stinchcomb about Stacey Searles? And my general thought was, are you sure this is a good idea? I mean, does this look like a good idea? I don't know. In fact, some of y'all, kind of mentioned this to me on Twitter, which you're fair to bring up. That I kind of looked at the Searles thing, thinking, a couple of years ago it was Sam Pittman, then it was Matt Luke, and now it's Stacey Searles. Are you sure this is a good idea? Well, guess what? Georgia's offensive line was amazing this year. Amazing. I think they're the best offensive line in the country. And, whatever you thought about Stacey Searles before, well, now you got to look at him and say, he did a very good job with his offensive line this past season. I mean, I'm forced to conclude he must have because the results were good. So, there's nothing wrong with having like an opinion going into something. And those of us who just watch this stuff on TV and, watch it from inside the stadium, obviously our opinion is going to be formulated by our experience, what we remember having seen in the past. And I think it was probably fair. I don't think we were ever unfair to Coach Searles when we said, are we sure this is a good hire? Is this what Georgia needs to be doing? This seems a little bit surprising. And yet, hopefully, we're also fair that when the results are better than we probably anticipated they would be, or at least when the results are better than we feared they might be, that's probably the better way to say that. Well, guess what? We get to say, hey, guess what? I guess they didn't know what they were doing. I guess Kirby knew what he was doing, and there you go. I guess the other thing that comes to mind for me is like the one thing that I start to like realize about football, and I've been kind of on this journey for a long time. Football is complicated. Football is very, very complicated. It is a complex system. In other words, we see like a binary result. You won, you lost. But in terms of what actually contributes to that, man, that's complicated and it's intertwined, and I don't even know that the people who are necessarily in the midst of it all can fully unravel and really kind of get to the heart of the matter of what made a team good, what made a coach good, what was the sort of recipe for success. I just think sometimes it's really hard to kind of unravel all of that. So let's take a coach. Take Stacey Searles, just talking about a moment ago. So we would have this perception of, well, in so-and-so year, Stacey Searles coached the Georgia offensive line, and it wasn't good. So therefore, that's an issue for Stacey Searles. And it might be. I mean, sometimes, the simplest answer is the most correct. But in other cases, who knows what else was going on that kind of created that and made it be what it was. And, that's why you see a lot of good coaches, at least coaches that go on to great success, that not every year of their coaching career necessarily looks like that great success. That there's a lot of checkered past that end up being really, great performance. I mean, I guess Bill Belichick made the best example of this. Bill Belichick was kind of viewed to be a below average coach or an average coach for a while. Was not a big winner with the Cleveland Browns. It's been well documented a million times, and he's going to end his coaching career as maybe the best of all time in the NFL level. It's just one of those things that, why you weren't always that coach is complicated and not easy to unravel. And I think in terms of the conversation we have here, while I'm going to have strong opinions and you're going to have strong opinions, I do try to keep in mind, in the back of my mind at least, that the actual truth of some of these matters is pretty complicated, even for the people who are more of an expert than I am. Let's see what else. Bill Kelly on the subject of recruiting, which I do think is a positive for Mike Bobo. I mean, the story that Jeff had with Dylan Raiola the other day. Jeff says it's not Raiola, it's Raiola. But anyway, the story with Raiola the other day, Raiola mentioned Bobo prior to mentioning Monken in terms of what drew him to Georgia. Johnny Prescott says, I'm a great host for DawgNation, but he's not sure my arbitration skills are bridging this Bobo divide. He says, even Jake Fromm, Aaron Murray, and Terrence Edwards don't seem to be getting any traction. Yeah, so far that's the case. And, Johnny, you may be right. I was sort of, heading towards a disappointing conclusion from the very get-go. Maybe the case. Maybe a fool's errand on my part. Let's see what else. Let me pop over to DawgNation.com again, and then we'll take one final trip around the comment section after that. Morris Rich, Orlando Dog, does agree that it would be very fun to win a championship with these sort of Georgia guys there. And by the way, isn't it amazing to think all three of these players were on the 1994 team together? And that's the only time all three were on the same team. Is that right, that 1994 is the only time that all three guys were on the same team? I'm getting the thumbs up from Kaylee on that. That team went, 4-7? It's amazing to think that I think it was a four. I don't believe they went to a bowl that year. A 4-win team. Wait, what was Georgia? Am I right about this? 1994 Georgia football. I think it was a 4-win team, right? According to, it says they were 6-4. I don't remember that. I thought they were a losing record that year. I guess they had a better record than I remember. Anyway, they're 6-4. They were 6-4-1 in 1994. They tied Auburn. I remember they tied Auburn. Auburn had that crazy winning streak. In 1993, they had been undefeated, best team on the radio because they were not allowed to play games on TV because they were an NCAA suspension. Auburn went undefeated. Georgia, they tied them that day, 23-23. I remember that. But I don't remember them being 6-4-1 that year. I thought they had a losing record in 94. But either way, that's not a great team. And it produced the triumvirate of coaches that now Georgia's going to entrust to go win 3 national championships, or its 3rd straight national championship. Pretty amazing how that works out. Ken Holcomb also likes the idea of keeping this coaching core together for a while. Senior Dog 54, RIP to Raquel Welch. Yeah, for sure. She's one of those celebrities that, she's pretty old by the time I even knew who she was. And, you go back and see like Shawshank Redemption, some of those movies when you realize, just how revered she was in her moment, which is great. Devil Dog 97 also points out something really important here, which is during the Richt era, when did Bobo ever have the defense like Kirby Smart has right now? Yeah, I mean, some of those Georgia defenses gave up darn near 30 points per game. Like, you got to be a great offensive coordinator to sort of keep pace with some of that, for sure. DT says Gunnar Stockton maybe having a better chance because of Bobo. I definitely think that the Bobo move here opens up the competition a little bit more, and you can't deny that, I guess, the Bobo family and Gunnar have had a little bit of a relationship with each other for some time. I mean, Georgia's going to choose the right quarterback no matter what. I think that Gunnar was going to be a factor in this quarterback competition anyway, but, I think this does kind of reshuffle the deck, maybe just a little bit. Let's see what else. Columbus Dog says Bobo will be fine. If not, he's going to be gone. Yeah, that's the other thing here, too, is that, ultimately, Kirby Smart is not going to sacrifice his legacy just to be good to his friends. I just believe that wholeheartedly. That I get the idea that, you might have some skepticism about this, whatever else, but the whole notion of some of us who are like, well, if this is the hire that Kirby Smart wants to make, we trust him to make it, but also we would acknowledge that he gets to make it because of the success that he's had. He doesn't get to keep him in place, though, if this doesn't work. In other words, this can't be Kirk and Brian Ferentz, the Iowa offensive coordinator who's, struggled to score any points whatsoever, but Kirk seemingly won't fire him because it's his son. You can't have a Brian Ferentz relationship at a place like Georgia. If for whatever reason Bobo weren't successful, clearly Kirby doesn't get to keep him employed forever just because he won 2 national championships. I don't believe that's going to be an issue. I really don't. But I am openly willing to acknowledge that the freedom to hire who you want exists for Kirby Smart right now, but the freedom to keep someone employed who's not succeeding does not exist for Kirby, nor will it ever exist. I mean, listen, even if you won 6 national championships, you still don't get to not try your hardest the following year or the following years after that. The pressure to win doesn't really go down no matter how much you've won in the past. Georgia could win 5 national championships in a row, but if Kirby Smart walked into whoever's office, I'm not even sure who would even count as Kirby's boss, but walk into somebody's office and say, Josh Brooks, and say, hey, Josh, I just won you 5 national championships. I'm about to take the next 5 years off. We're going to coast the next 5 years. Well, Josh Brooks, Jerry Moorhead, guys like that would say, well, listen, we're really thankful for the success you provided, but we can't have you just sort of coasting into retirement now. We've got pressure to kind of keep succeeding at a very high level. And Kirby Smart, of course, understands that. He's wired that way. So this is a situation where this is what Kirby Smart thinks is the best hire. I believe that Kirby ought to be trusted to make that hire. I believe that, the track record he has just means he gets to do that. But for some reason, if it doesn't work, and we've kind of talked about how you would define what not working might look like, if it doesn't work, you don't get to keep him. You can hire him. You hire whoever you want. You're Kirby Smart. You won 2 national championships. But you don't get to keep someone who's not working. So in the very unlikely situation, this is not a success, then obviously at that point in time, he would have to address that. So Columbus Dog, I believe, is right. Let's see what else. DT says friends can find it hard to fire friends, but Kirby Smart's cold-blooded. Yeah, I don't even know that it's necessarily about cold-blooded. It's just about, you have a professional obligation. And, these guys, I think that coaches have way thicker skin than you probably realize. Because at one point in time, Muschamp and Kirby would have been contemporaries with each other. And, Muschamp's a little older than Kirby is. And at one point in time, Muschamp was sort of the hot thing. And at the time, really not that many people really knew that much about Kirby Smart. Muschamp was supposedly the coach in waiting at Texas, and then he left Texas to be head coach at Florida. Big deal. And then obviously, next couple stops for him didn't go quite as well. And around that same time, Kirby was emerging. So you have this situation where good friends, and, listen, privately, friends kind of compete with each other a little bit. You have this situation where good friends, where at one point in time, Muschamp's up here, Kirby's down here. Then over the course of time, Muschamp kind of recedes a little bit. Kirby kind of ascends a little bit. And yet in the coaching world, you just sort of understand that's kind of how things are. Scoreboard determines things. As I said, sometimes it's kind of complicated to sort of figure out what makes the final score what it is. And I think that Kirby would say, hey, different situation, maybe it works out differently for me. Muschamp could certainly say, hey, different situation, maybe I win a little bit more than I did, and maybe my coaching careers look a little bit differently. But the idea of, hard to fire my friend, or don't want to hire my friend, I'm good, this guy's not, I'm better than him. I think these coaches just have a lot better perspective about that kind of stuff, because to enter into that profession means making peace with the kind of wild swings that perception of you can have over the course of time. David Thomas wondering, with Bobo back, whether or not Bryce Ramsey's going to seek one more year of eligibility. That's really funny. All right, let me go back to YouTube, and then we're going to get ready to wrap things up for today. Good to see Christy in here stirring it up, as always. Nakia Copeland says UGA is too loaded to take a step back at this point. Bobo is going to do well. Nakia may be right about that. Alan Hampton says, I'm a mega fan of the running game, and I believe that Bobo is going to make a better use of our great running backs. I think Alan may be right about that. At least that's what I hope is true. I think that's a real opportunity for Georgia. Even though the Todd Monken offense was measurably great, I do think there was an opportunity to create more running game. And I think there's a nature with which, like, a more dependable, dominant running game, I think creates offensive excellence. It's a little bit more sustainable. In other words, like the Georgia offense has been great the last couple of years, but as we said going into the start of last season, hey, if you can have the offensive performance but also add a little bit more running game to it, then you make it maybe more bulletproof, and that's what it kind of comes down to, because that just sort of travels from week to week. I think that Mike Bobo may have a chance to do that. Christy's laughing. So the only reason why I said what I said is because when I popped over here to YouTube, I saw you were going back and forth with somebody, and I couldn't tell what y'all were talking about, so I just said that you were in here stirring it up. But I couldn't tell what you were talking about. That's the only reason why I said that. Let's see what else. Christopher Vale says a strong running game is a quarterback security blanket. That's right. That's right indeed as well. And maybe more important this year just because Georgia's breaking in a new quarterback. All right, what else? UGA boy for life, Brunetti says that Todd Monken's going to be begging to come back after he falls on his head in the NFL. It's a different beast. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Monken's obviously had a couple of tastes in the NFL. I think he craves success. But I was thinking about this. So I don't really follow the NFL nearly as close as some of y'all do. But I was thinking about this. So didn't the Falcons just hire a new defensive coordinator? Didn't Dean Pease retire? I may have my facts slightly off on this. So I live in Atlanta, right? Big sports fan, kind of exist in the sort of sports culture of Georgia media, whatnot. Like, I can't think of one conversation I've heard anybody have about Dean Pease. Hey, who should the Falcons go out and get as defensive coordinator? I'm sure there's some Falcons blog somewhere that has, broken their back trying to cover that story. I realize that. But in terms of, like, my actual life, the Dean Beast – not Dean Beast, the Dean Pease hot list of, oh, my gosh, who's the next Falcons DC? That is not moving the needle for anybody in my life. It's just not. Do you know how many conversations I've had at, like, the grocery store and the ball field and church and blah, blah, blah about the possibility that Todd Monken might leave? That's one of the other things, too, that goes on with this college coordinator deal is, y'all, we are not viewed as normal people by some of these NFL types. They just think we're obsessives. They think we're crazy. And so I think that's also kind of part of what these coaches sort of like there as well. In addition to not having to recruit, not having to transfer portal, and not having to whatever, it's also you get to have this good bit of anonymity. Monken may make $3 million, but he can walk up and down, Annapolis or whatever, suburb of Baltimore he wants to live in and not necessarily have a ton of people even know who he is. Whereas if, like, Todd Monken walked up and down any, part of Northeast Georgia, everybody in the world knows who he is. And that's not everybody's cup of tea. Right? Not everybody just necessarily loves all that. And so it's weird. Like, the NFL is clearly the most dominant sporting league of them all. It is more popular than college football. But it's possible to go to the NFL and be a little more anonymous than any college person, college coach around here. And that's part of what also makes this not necessarily be for everybody. William Perry says, hopefully that Bobo has learned not to call two incomplete, followed by a run at the middle on 3rd and long. He was still doing it at Auburn, and their fans were screaming the same complaints that we used to. Yeah, there's no doubt that the last 2 stops for Bobo were not successful stints. I think you can, certainly forgive the Auburn thing from the standpoint that entire situation was a disaster, and I think Bobo was only kind of brought there to sort of, give some SEC bona fides to a coach that clearly didn't have them. The South Carolina thing, maybe you judge him a little bit more harshly for that. Or maybe the die was already cast and Muschamp was definitely going to be on his way out the door, and there's very little that Bobo could have done about it. I don't exactly know. But I do think it's fair to point out a couple of lackluster stints in the SEC prior to getting this job. I think that's a fair thing to bring up. I'm not as into the argument of, well, Bobo's play calling was predictable at Georgia. That doesn't carry as much weight with me as the more provable fact of, hey, it didn't work out at Auburn, didn't work out at South Carolina. Is it going to work out better this time at Georgia? That's a little bit more of what I would say is a fact-based conversation, and I think it's a fair question to ask. I think it probably will, but it's fair to ask that question. I believe that's true. All right, we got to go. Christy asked the question. She says, will Kirby ever leave the NFL? If so, when? So one of these days we'll talk about this. I believe the chances of Kirby Smart one day trying the NFL are probably a little bit greater than the average person believes. In other words, there are a lot of smart people, a lot of respected people, a lot of you maybe even who would say zero chance, zero chance, never going to happen. And I don't believe I'd put the chance at zero. I believe I might put the chance a little higher than that, but not necessarily very high. I don't think he's chomping at the bit to go to the NFL. But at some point in time, would he maybe consider it? So if we think about, I'm going to do this show for the next 20 years. Hopefully I do it much longer than that. But let's say I'm doing it for the next 20 years. Will there ever be a summer in which, or whatever time of year it would be, will there ever be an off season in which we're having this conversation of, ooh, will Kirby take the blah, blah, blah job, whatever job that might be? Forever is a long time. Forever is a long time. Decades is a long time to look into the future. I think the chances of at least being a topic at some point in time probably better than maybe some other folks do. Ultimately, it's not my prediction that he will go to the NFL. I don't completely rule it out the way that some people do, or the way that I would completely rule out the notion of Kirby Smart coaching some other college team. That's obviously, I would say, never going to happen. I wouldn't quite say never for the NFL, but I don't think it's an imminent thing or anything like that. Christy says maybe after his youngins graduate from high school. Yeah, that's the other thing you got to – I think that Christy's on something about this. That's the other thing that you got to keep in mind with Kirby. And I've been told this many times. Being a father is really important to him. Really. I don't know Kirby personally. I'm just saying this is what's been kind of relayed to me. That really important to him. And the worst kept secret in the world is it's not as important to a lot of coaches, but it's really, really important to Kirby. So family or as y'all want me to say, family and stuff like that is a very big factor in any decision he might ever make. Kirby wants to be a dad to his kids and a husband to his wife. That's a thing that he wants to do along the way towards having great success. He wants to be a present figure at home too. So when you think about what he might do one day, what he is doing now, that's a part of this too. All right, we have got to go. Gosh, it gets so late so fast. All right, last time at Facebook, last time at DawgNation.com, I'm going to go. Sonia Prescott. We're talking about, family being important for Kirby and wanting to do right by his kids. And she goes, well, then I hope he has another kid. Meaning that means he just sort of stays in place even longer. That's funny, Sonia. That's funny. Santi D. Arnold says, have a great vacation. I appreciate that. Santi also let us know the other day we gave him a golden shoe because he's going to be joining us on that Dog Nation cruise. We're excited about that. We are excited about that for sure. And Santi, I appreciate you saying that. Greg Chalmers also brings up a really good point there as well. He says, if you told me that Kirby would have won 2 titles for his career, I would have taken it. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Celicia Gagnon, I appreciate that. And Celicia, I hope I pronounced your name correct. I really do. But thank you for the kind words. Celicia's told me how to say her name before, but sometimes I forget. But I hope I'm saying that right. Let's see what else. Joel Moody says we'll win the national title this year. Crow's going to be served at the championship parade. Yeah, maybe this year it's going to be Mike Bobo who gets – maybe that's the thing, is the Them Dogs is Hell sweatshirt should just be passed around to whoever gets the most criticism, and that's the person that gets to wear the sweatshirt during the championship parade. And Bobo can come up there and be like, you said we couldn't do this, you said we couldn't do that, and he sort of dropped the mic. Maybe Bobo gets to wear the "Them Dogs is Hell" sweatshirt to the championship parade this year, as a way of retribution against his critics. And Celicia says I did pronounce her name correctly, which is good to know. Miriam, thanks for the kind words. All right, we got to go. Thanks to everybody. Appreciate that. Really, really good stuff. Randy Hall, yes, there will be plenty of dog national championship gear on the cruise, showing it off for everybody that dogs are on top, and we're in the Caribbean to celebrate. So we're looking forward to that. All right, y'all, tomorrow, good show. I won't be able to comment with you, but y'all comment with each other. It's going to be a good time. And then all next week there as well, and then back on Monday. Come back then to see how tanned I am. Do I have the winter tan in place? Because that's always my goal. My goal is for Georgia to keep winning national championships and for me to find a way to be tan 12 months out of the year. Those are the only two things I want out of life. Georgia to keep winning and me to stay tan. So there you go. We'll see if we can work on that there a little bit. Y'all have a good time with our shows over the course of the next few days. Y'all don't fight with each other too much because I'm not here to referee. But I will see you back then and see you tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Also, our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, online, AJC.com. Plenty of news ongoing there. Honestly, I don't know who the Falcons ever did hire to replace Dean Peace. But I'm sure that they have reported on that plenty of the AJC, so you can read more about that. Also, the Hawks have given up about 400 points in their last two games. Got to start playing a little more defense. You can read more about that online, AJC.com as well. And R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today, including I'm going to be in the Caribbean where it's nice and warm, and it only gets me thinking about the fact that it's going to be warm here pretty soon there too, which means air conditioning units. Time to get them back tuned up to factory fresh specs. Our friends at R.S. Andrews can do that for you online at rsandrews.com, and it only costs $99. You trust them, they're on that. And then we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.